Hi everyone, I'm Jacob, part of the PAI policy team. And yeah, today we're going to talk through kind of AI transparency and accountability for foundation models, which is very interesting and topical after that discussion, where I literally heard transparency straight away. Claire wasn't a plan for that, by the way.
And hi everyone, my name's Albert. I'm a program research associate with our programs and research team. And so I'm just happy to dive right into it. And so what do we know, right? And so in the past 5 to 6 years, we've seen a rise in the development and deployment of foundation models, starting with the introduction of models like GPT-1 and BERT, and the widespread usage that exploded 2 years ago with the release of ChatGPT. Fast forward to now, those models have led the way for more advanced models like GPT-4, Gemini Ultra, Llama 3, which are behind many of these systems that are integrated in everyday life. For example, doctors using AI transcription services for case notes, teenagers writing full-on essays with ChatGPT, and employers utilizing AI to screen applicants, and people finding comfort with personalized chatbots, and also the photos that you see all over Facebook, or like whether they're fake or not, that your relatives have shared, right? And despite these widespread use of foundation models, we have limited data and understanding on their impacts on society post-deployment. So asking questions like, who benefits, who is being harmed, and who holds this information? And so we can start to figure out some of these questions by understanding what documentation practices exist post-deployment. And so what are the stakes? These headlines are just a couple of occurrences that has happened this year, and we are slowly finding out that the impacts that these models and systems are having on society. And so what should we do as a collective to help address this?
And so organizations in other sectors such as finance, medicine, and social media have grown to understand that answering those questions is really key to improving safety, managing risks, avoiding these headlines. And in the AI space, policymakers across the world are recognizing that as well and are taking action. Examples include the EU's AI Act, the G7 Hiroshima Code of Conduct, NIST AI Risk Management Framework, all of which highlight the importance of transparency post-deployment. However, it will require collective action to actually adopt those practices that will help us to better understand the impact of these models.
And one of my favorite fictional uncles would say, with great power comes great responsibility. And in our case, we get to ask who has power and who should be responsible as we explore the post-deployment documentation world. And so today we'll cover 2 documentation practices that organizations could adopt. We'll discuss whether organizations are currently doing them or not, the challenges that act as blockers to adoption, and what we recommend different stakeholders do to help the field move forward.
So the first practice we want to share and kind of highlight is sharing usage information. This means understanding and sharing where foundation models are being used, for what purposes, which sectors, geographies, how often are they used for llamas, kind of, holiday planning, this kind of thing. And there are 3 main benefits to doing this. One is to help organizations identify valuable use cases, understand where things are actually useful, where foundation models are useful. 2 is to identify and assess and manage these risks better. And 3 is to develop evidence-based proportionate policy. So this kind of documentation is most commonly done in the form of transparency reports, where there are clear precedents in other areas. So for example, for digital platforms, we know that 30 million people in Germany used Apple's App Store. And this is through their transparency report. And so any changes that happen on the App Store will potentially affect that 30 million people. Even smaller applications share usage data openly. So I changed the format of an ebook on the weekend, and the application I used told me that I was one of the 12% of people based in the US who was using that converter. But how many people use ChatGPT monthly? How many downstream applications use Llama? And so when there is an update to these models, how many people actually end up being affected by that? We can't currently answer these questions. Companies can also analyze and share usage logs with the appropriate privacy protections with trusted third parties for more in-depth analysis of the usage. This involves gathering a data set of what people have input into these models and the responses that these models have provided, while protecting the privacy of the users who've used them. This provides a basis for much more rigorous analysis than pre-deployment evaluation. So one version of this collected and analyzed 1 million prompts from ChatGPT and realized that in 2023, between 5 and 10% of outputs were actually classified as toxic. So that is kind of sexual, violent, or other types of content. But this then decreased to between 1 and 3% in early 2024. This kind of analysis is vital for organizations to actually manage these risks and can support further research into the economic, environmental impacts of the models. And sharing usage information is not completely new. We've seen in other domains kind of highlighted transparency reports from the EU earlier. Also, anonymized payment data is shared with the UK's Office of National Statistics. The US FDA monitors drug usage. AI usage surveys are carried out by the US National Census Bureau. So there is a lot of precedent for this work. But post-deployment transparency for foundation models in particular remains limited. If you want to know how many times an open model has actually been downloaded and used, you can get some information from Hugging Face, model hosting site, and Google, Meta, and Stability AI have shared some information on beneficial generative AI use cases. But the majority of information of usage still comes from third parties. So, for example, Ofcom in the UK conducted a survey that 3/4 of young online adults have used generative AI, and Wired identified 50 bots on Telegram that were used to create explicit deepfakes with over 4 million monthly users. Without actors in the value chain actually understanding what their models and systems are being used for, it's currently up to other stakeholders to understand the usage for them.
And so the second practice we want to highlight is enabling and sharing societal impact research. Documenting and sharing societal impact of AI models, like their effects on labor and the environment, help foster accountability and trust in those models. Multi-stakeholder collaborations are critical to enabling this type of research, especially by sharing data, model access, financial resources, and these insights. Model-level stakeholders such as model providers, application developers benefit from this practice by gaining competitive advantages by differentiating their products and services based on documented social responsibility. Impact-level stakeholders like civil society, academia, and regulators benefit from evidence-based research to protect vulnerable communities and inform policy decisions. Currently, civil society and academia and different types of watchdog organizations are primarily these stakeholders leading the research and reporting of labor and environmental impacts. At a baseline, this type of research is done by collecting research through public databases, surveys, and personal testimonies to inform their findings. In some instances, collaborations with a model provider are conducted to provide academic and civil society researchers with deeper access and insight for mutual benefit, as shown as an example based by Brookings Institute and OpenAI's efforts to research job and labor impacts in the United States. Though the datasets and model architecture may still be private, the learnings and analysis are still beneficial for public information and any future policy recommendations. There are also other instances where model providers, those with capital, are able to conduct their own research. Research from Meta about environmental impacts express concern about the extensive computational resources and energy consumptions that large-scale models require. They also advocate for more efficient development of AI models and call on the rest of their peers to address the growing concern for environmental challenges facing the growing industry. Meta not only gains from their own research, but also contributes to adding important empirical evidence into the research space for others to add on to. There are also policy precedents that exist for this practice. The EU Code of Practice calls for signatories to collect model-agnostic evidence of the systemic risks presented by their models through various means, including collaborations with civil society and academia. The Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive from the EU requires large companies to publish regular reports on the social and environmental risk they face and how their activities impact people and the environment. While that policy is not specifically targeted for AI use cases, the AI models and products may factor into an organization's overall sustainability goals. Though much of the research exists from civil society and academic actors, model providers, application developers, and model hosting hubs can help continue to support these endeavors.
And so despite these kind of documentation, transparency practices being adopted in other domains, there's not widespread adoption of these practices for foundation models yet. This is understandable, given we're only kind of 2 years into that widespread deployment of foundation models. And through our collaborative work, we've identified 3 main challenges that need to be addressed before they can become standard. So firstly, there is the lack of standardized guidance, rules, templates, and norms. People don't know how to share post-deployment information or make it transparent. We lack consensus on a few fundamental questions in the area. So what information should be publicly and privately disclosed? How do we balance transparency with privacy concerns, proprietary concerns? Who is responsible for what along the value chain? In our workshops, stakeholders described this as kind of leading to finger pointing, where a vacuum in responsibility causes organizations to default to that's kind of someone else's job. This confusion is particularly acute with open models, where the ecosystem of stakeholders is much more complex, and model release strategies vary significantly. And though there is initial research into these questions, the answers haven't been scrutinized and legitimized through standards or other forums yet.
Second, even when organizations know what information to share and their responsibilities in sharing it, the current landscape presents operational complexities. Model providers that create models may lack access to deployment data. Application developers generate data, but may be unable to share it due to privacy concerns and restrictions, and competitive concerns. Users who generate impact data but have privacy protections, and researchers and policymakers need comprehensive data but may be unable to access them. These issues are exacerbated for open model developments with more actors and fewer systems of coordination. Additionally, data privacy is a consistent challenge for stakeholders, and while there are ways to protect privacy, they are not yet embedded into post-deployment information setting.
And then finally, where organizations know what to do and how to do it, there are still structural barriers arising from tensions between transparency and market incentives, and also a lack of kind of reporting infrastructure that we see in other areas such as cybersecurity. Organizations, understandably, may not want to share research or usage information that may expose them to liability claims or provide kind of commercially sensitive details. Unlike other sectors, we lack established reporting structures to address those concerns. For comparison, the EU's Data Governance Act provides support and rules for intermediaries to analyze information in the public interest. And the US transportation sector also has a central database for crash reports so that policy can be informed by analysis of this data.
And so through our work, we highlight 4 practices that play an important role in managing risk and driving accountability. You've heard 2 of them. The other 2 are reporting incidents and sharing feedback, user feedback. And so we believe that these practices are crucial for assessing the benefits and the risk for foundation models. And so if you are involved in deploying these models, you should look at how you can incorporate these practices into your governance. And for each challenge, we suggest a recommendation to move the field forward.
Yeah, so firstly, to overcome that kind of lack of standardized guidance, rules, norms, etc., we ask people in this room to get involved in those processes. Many of you already do through PAI kind of standards, kind of PAI working groups, which is great. But the EU Code of Practice also has a section on post-market monitoring and transparency. NIST is developing voluntary standards for dual-use models, and other bodies such as the Frontier Model Forum and ML Commons, which we heard about earlier today, are also making headway. Secondly, to kind of overcome the coordination and data sharing challenges, we recommend that organizations explore how technical privacy-preserving methods can be applied to post-deployment information, and should explore how to responsibly share data across the value chain and with third parties, given the kind of complex ecosystem of actors. This may require external coordination, such as with FDA post-deployment monitoring, or may require the implementation of safe harbor mechanisms, where academics and researchers are permitted access to analyze information in the public interest, given they follow a set of protocols to protect privacy.
And third, to overcome incentives and structural challenges, we recommend policymakers take a look at how a central function can coordinate incidents and information to understand systemic risk. We encourage you all to start thinking about how to adopt these practices because the stakes are clear. Without transparency on the usage and impact of these models, we can't see the actual benefits and harms of these models in the real world. And the way we govern these systems will be incomplete. So exploring how you can be involved in developing these practices and collaborating with others to share and analyze post-deployment information responsibly will make a big difference to how these models impact society.
And this speech might have sounded a bit like a report because we are writing a report, which we strongly encourage you to look at. The hope is to release it next month in January. But yeah, really think it's a great overview of the current state of the field for this. And you can learn how you can drive accountability through post-deployment, kind of transparency through that. We want to thank everyone who has been involved in that work so far. So I've seen Alex and Fionn who have input into the working group and workshop. And yeah, if you want to talk about this topic with us, yeah, we're happy to talk anytime. Thanks.
Thank you.
Any questions?
Thank you so much. My name is Hunter. I work for a nonprofit organization called Solar Responders. We are a green energy nonprofit, infrastructure nonprofit. We've invested a lot of time on the ground, building trust with local stakeholders, and I'm still like, this is a really great event, and I'm still I'm very new to the AI space. I'm still trying to learn how, as a very data-driven and community-oriented nonprofit, how we can benefit from AI and AI partners. I guess my question is, as an organization, as I said, we've invested so much, 6 years developing local partnerships. Why should we trust the AI community? Why should we risk those partnerships? Why, to integrate AI? It seems like it's just too much of a risk. So if just after all this talk about the uncertainties and the need for more research and more answers, it just seems like it's very early on. So like, why should we trust the process now? Why should we trust as a community stakeholder? Why should we trust you guys?
Us guys, oh God.
Gave you the easy question, huh?
Yeah. I can quickly go and then I can hand it over. So first of all, we heard earlier this morning that it's not just all risks, like there are benefits to using this, and sometimes there is a risk to not actually implementing AI because you are stopping, you can think of healthcare. If it does actually help in a specific area, you might be saving lives, for example. I think just taking a very balanced view and having as much data as possible to help you assess what is actually a risk and what is kind of just not yet known. So for example, I think we heard during Claire's talk that there was this big worry that misinformation, there would be something huge that would happen around the election, and that didn't actually pan out, though there are still many other risks related to that. And so the kind of what we are exploring is how can we better understand when these models are put out into the world, what is their actual impact, where are they used, which of the risks which we think are risks are we actually seeing play out in the real world, and what is the impact of them. And so that can be done through actually being more transparent about the impact of these models in the real world. And then that can help organizations such as you and your community make a more informed decision as to whether to use these models. But it's not all risks. Part of our role is to scrutinize those risks and make sure it's developed in a better way. But there are benefits to implementing things. Sorry, talk.
Oh, no. Just to ditto Jacob's point here on the last part about like transparency being useful to make informed decisions. And I think part of how we're all situated in this ecosystem is that whether we like it or not, we are affected by them, right? And so how can we make sure that those decisions, those systems are all transparent? And how you can benefit from more transparent information. And it's so fair to also say that your communities have been harmed by these systems and you don't want to engage. And that's also a very valid answer as well.
Jeremy at Apple. Just an observation. I think a lot of people in here have spent a lot of time thinking about AI, and I think Hunter's question is, when you think about the broader set of system and solution builders out in the world, they don't actually have experience and intuition applying AI, right? A lot of it is logic-based programming, where if something doesn't go right, there's a bug, you need to fix it, and you know that you can change a line of code and you can fix it. And so I wonder if in this space there is some more guidance on making that transition from logic-based solutions to probabilistic solutions, and how to think about those trade-offs differently, because it's a different paradigm. What are your thoughts on that, and how does that play into the guidance?
Really quickly to start the response, one of our other guidance sharing user feedback is an important mechanism, right, to collect, again, how things are being seen in the world, and helping sort of what are some of everyday people's experience being collected through model providers or application developers, or some of the hosting hubs that can potentially collect this information, and a part of that section of the report is also to recommend that they take sort of the inclusive participatory norms that we've already developed here with the sort of the global task force and implement that within collecting user feedback. And so that way, in the other talks we've heard today, especially the one on disability, is to actively involve these community members into the processes to help lessen some of the jargon, the technical jargon, and the systematic jargon that maybe everyday people don't know and don't realize.
And I'll talk about incident feedback. So you get to hear about all 4 practices today. That's pretty lucky. Where that point has come up because if for a normal computer system, you find there is an incident, you report it to the people who made it. Generally, they have 90 days before they make it transparent, so that other people can learn from that incident and make that line or two of change in the code. That, because foundation models are more probabilistic, it may not be a simple 1 or 2 line change. There may need to be, and it may not be that you can add in a filter or something to make that change. It may be something more fundamental with how it's trained or the data. And so that may be a very different process to resolving that incident. Those are things that we're kind of highlighting as open questions, and there's a lot of those open questions in this space. Part of what we're trying to do is document them so that people can explore them in more detail next. But yeah, a super interesting question. Anybody else?
Hi, Rebecca from PAI. Thanks so much for the update on this work that you've been doing. And, I think one of the inspirations for this work was, as you stated off the top, this real gap between what we are seeing emerging in the policy space with regard to the expectations of this set of monitoring and transparency reportings that are going to need to be put into place from a monitoring perspective post-deployment, and where the field is in terms of best practices in that regard. And so in terms of the recommendations that you received from the workshop participants, was there sort of a prioritization of those particular potential next steps around one particular area of reporting or transparency? Or, so it'd be interesting to know if there's one piece of it that would be important to get started on first.
Yeah, I think we're still working with the working group. The deadline for feedback from everyone was today, so we've got lots of feedback today to look through. I think one of the areas where it's easier to make an impact is with incident reporting, because there is a stronger precedent for it, and there is more technical information on how it's been done previously. I think we will be exploring with the working group exactly which one, how they think they can make make progress in this field soon. But I mean, they're all important. But you're right, we need to,
something that we didn't get to showcase in our slides were also that we have with the report showcases different sub-processes or practices that each of the main practices have underneath them, and the different types of adoption that they have throughout the field. And so one of our recommendations is to sort of like adopt also like the ones that have high adoption rates. And so those are easy ones that like we have evidence of in the field that work, that people use. And like one very simple one is like sort of like the idea of thumbs up or thumbs down prompts and within like models, so that's a very easy way to collect feedback. And I think that's all the time we have. So thank you so much for the time and the listening, and hope you enjoy the rest of the day.